Well, welcome back to Truck Tech, everyone, the live version from the Future of Freight here in Chattanooga today. It's good to be with everybody. You know, I think doing this live, a lot more lights on my face than at home, I'll tell you that. But listen, I really think we got to start today. We've got a couple good guests on the show with us. We'll have Justin Turner, not the baseball player, from Terawatt, and then we'll have Jonathan Colbert, who kind of part two of our discussion that started in Cleveland back in June. But first, I want to hit a few headlines for you. You know, we've had some news breaking all around the conference, really. And just last evening, evening before last, it looks like we're going to get to the end of the Mack truck strike one way or the other next week. The union, the United Auto Workers, is going to go ahead and vote on the agreement that they rejected by 73% back in early October. And they're going to go again because Mack said, that's it. That's all we're going to do for a master agreement. We've got some changes in the few of the local agreements that affect the operations in Florida and Maryland and also in Pennsylvania where Mack has its main plant. But it looks like this is going to come to a head. And it's interesting because really we were watching what would happen with the Detroit 3 automakers in the UAW. We now have tentative agreements in all three of those places. And I think Mack just realized, look, you know, this is the best we could do. The union liked it when we did it. They called it a record contract for the trucking industry at the time. And so we're not really going to do any more. And that includes cost of living adjustments, which the auto workers did bargain back into their agreement. They had given those up back in 2009 during the Great Recession. And so Mack, we'll see what happens now, whether we get this approved or not. Really hard to say what happens next. You know, 2 years ago, when the UAW struck for 5 weeks at Volvo, they basically said the company just implemented the agreement after 3 tries. And so we don't know what will happen next week, but we'll be watching that one. Also, yesterday, we saw that Hyliion is, in fact, going to give up on the Hypertruck ERX. This is the powertrain they've been working on for several years, and it was what prompted the SPAC agreement back in 2020 that they had with Tortoise Acquisition. But basically, at this point, the board has said, you know what? Our strategic review says you don't have a good plan for sufficiency with this product. Therefore, we're not going to do it. They do have a bit of a lifeline with some technology that they bought from General Electric Aviation back in August of 2022 called Carno. So they're going to try to make a go of a business around stationary generators. This Carno generator can run on a multitude of different fuels, not all at once, but it can have a number of different approaches. So we'll see what happens there. But that's going to be the new business for Hyliion. We can wave goodbye, sadly, to the Hypertruck ERX. Okay, so let's welcome in Justin Turner from Terawatt. Justin, great to have you with us. Justin is, I was joking with him before we started that, you know, he's not white, he doesn't have red hair like the ball player, but we figure you got another story to tell. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Terawatt for a few minutes. Yep. And let's get an update. First of all, you're in the infrastructure space. You're building out infrastructure that's going to charge electric trucks. You take it.
Yes, sir. And it's funny, when I go to LA, they always recognize I'm not the baseball player, so it can make it interesting to get dinner reservations for sure. At Terawatt, we have a focus on building the most reliable network of charging solutions for fleets. We do support, light-duty vehicles as well, but we really believe there's a significant opportunity for fleets of all shapes and sizes to scale by using electricity. We've raised $1 billion of capital, all with the purpose of buying land in strategic markets where there's highly industrial fleets in major markets like Los Angeles, the Inland Empire, throughout the United States. And we believe that there's a real opportunity for fleets to find real value by migrating from diesel to battery electric vehicles.
You know, Justin, it's like this. There's a mismatch right now between electric truck availability and charging availability. You are not alone, obviously, in this space. Well capitalized, as you mentioned, with some background. You've got some competition, but it seems like there's plenty of space here for everybody, truly, in this case. How do we get back to some equilibrium, if you will, between truck availability and charging? I mean, what's it going to take to get us to the point where if I get an electric truck, it doesn't become a paperweight in my yard?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge that we're all trying to solve today. it can take a 2 to 3 year development timeline, to get the amount of available power that you need to be able to support a fleet of large scale. So we've taken a posture of accelerating. There's a variety of different temp power solutions that are able to deploy. There's a lot of different unique things that are available to fleets today. We've taken a position to allocate our resources to put them in markets very, very close to where the fleets are domiciled, at least to start, to make sure there's a very similar experience that they have today with diesel in battery electric vehicles.
One of the things that Nia Palmer, your co-founder or founder, talked about initially, and it was fascinating really, because it seemed like a big lift, honestly, and that was going across the Southwest, positioning charging in such a place that it could be for longer fills, or also just top-off charging as you head out west. Can you talk a little bit about where that stands right now and what kind of fill-in you're able to?
Yeah, we've made a commitment to electrify the I-10 corridor. So we own land from Southern California to El Paso, Texas, in an effort to allow that truck to scale. We think that the best use case for fleets is to be able to actually move freight, right? To be able to move it at scale. Some of the earlier use cases are around drayage, for sure. But we also think about how do trucking companies move freight on the lanes that they do already to support the customers that they have today at high quality. So to do that, we have to position our assets in places that we find are accretive to the customer, which are fleets for us, which are all based off current range capabilities. So our land typically spans between 150 to 200 mile radius in terms of nodes. So you'll find them from Los Angeles through Phoenix, to Tucson, through Albuquerque, New Mexico, all the way to El Paso. We're working with other potential opportunities today to move that truck throughout the Texas Triangle as well. We've made a commitment to electrify the I-5 corridor as well. So we're thinking about scale. We're thinking about not what the industry looks like today, but how that truck can move over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
You've got background, and obviously Nia does, and others. You mentioned, having some freight people, obviously yourself and others involved at Terawatt. But I guess the question really becomes, you've got to either make nice or have really good relationships with utilities to get your power. Otherwise, you're just going to have mobile power,
right?
At your facilities. I know some of that in the early days is the way it has to be.
Yeah. We our team is pretty diverse. So we have an energy division today that has really, really great relationships with the utilities. They've been awesome to work with. We work with Southern California Edison, PG&E, a variety of the best utility providers in the area to build the relationships we need to get the amount of power that the fleets will need to scale. Absolutely.
Can you give us kind of an update? And I know it's really hard to predict some of these things because every project's a little different.
Yes.
If it's an area that has a lot of power, let's say Fontana, California, a lot of power, a lot of cold storage, a lot of things that already exist that make it easier, to sort of tap into. But if you go to a place where you don't have a ready amount of power, and I would argue across I-10 there may be places like that, how do you account for that? What do you do in terms of how do you scale those places?
Yeah, that's where some of the temp, solutions come from. It might not be popular, but the objective is to allow the fleet to move, right? So we've been able to find creative means to allow our customers to find early access to power. Oftentimes it's a crawl, walk, run methodology. You might not be able to run fast immediately, but how do you, take the small incremental steps that the fleet needs to be able to get the truck into usage and start moving freight at high quality?
Just within the last 24 hours, I mentioned this in the headlines up front, we've seen now a pivot on the part of the Hyliion, which was going to do a hybrid, natural gas electric truck. Now they're going to do generators. Yep. And they hope by the fourth quarter of next year to begin having some generators in place for stationary power. Ultimately, they'd like to see these run as the primary source, not the backup. What do you think of something like that? You don't have to speak to Hyliion, but what do you think of the idea of some of these solutions while you're waiting for that longer-term solution to get in?
I think that's part of the crawl, walk, run, right? It's, you may have to find a unique solution to start because we are very, very much so in the infancy of this market. So that is some of the creative things that we've been considering as well with our earmark on the longer-term scalable solution that does come over time.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a point where we do get back? I asked the question a little bit earlier about equilibrium. Do you see a point where we reach that, or again, you mentioned drayage. These are shorter runs, obviously. Yep. It's the Inland Empire and back, and that's really where a lot of the purchases are going to be. But as we see trucking move toward more electrification, then you get out on the I-10 and that kind of thing. So for right now, are you pretty comfortable with where you are in California for drayage and things like that? I know Rancho Dominguez, thank you.
So
there's a lot of ranchos out there.
Yeah. So at Terawatt, you may have saw the recent announcement. We did a groundbreaking at our Rancho Dominguez site, which is to support the Port of Long Beach in LA. We have multiple sites that are being deployed in the Fontana, San Bernardino, Rialto area, coming online in the next 12 to 18 months. I think that also what's really interesting too, though, is there's a pretty cool dynamic, I think, happening today between shippers and also their vendors who are fleets. And this consortium that's kind of being created between the entity that's manufacturing and distributing the cargo, the entity that's moving the cargo, the fleet, and the charging provider. That's a fuel source, essentially, to power the dynamic between those two entities. They all kind of need each other. So I think that we play a part of it by positioning our inventory in places that's accretive to both of those parties. But I think there's also this really interesting joint venture that's starting to happen today, too, where the shippers are like, how do we help you guys? Maybe we can create e-lanes or some type of incentive programs to allow the fleets to feel comfortable buying an asset that at this point in time is technically a little bit more expensive than the current diesel vehicle.
No question. Well, listen, Justin, we got to wrap it up, but thank you so much for coming on. Great to have you today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, folks, we're going to stay on the subject because our next guest, Jonathan Colbert from Volterra, really operates in some of the same space that Terawatt does. And so let's bring Jonathan on. We saw each other in Cleveland. Jonathan, we met. I think we liked each other, so we can go ahead from there. We'll start with that. But great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you. Yeah. And same thing for you. Let's get the audience a little bit familiar with where Volterra is. Been a year now.
Yeah. Exactly a year. I was here a year ago chatting with some of your colleagues here at FreightWaves, and I guess maybe to start from ground one, we are an infrastructure and operations company. So we go out, we buy land, we develop it, we put in the infrastructure that zero-emission vehicle fleets need to be able to scale their operations. So both battery electric primarily, but also on the hydrogen side. A year ago, we set out to build and develop sites all across the United States. I'm happy and proud to say that we have 20 sites in development or live at this point. Of them, about 3 of those sites actually have available capacity left, so almost all fully subscribed by strong partners. In addition to that, we're in 26 markets. We're actively either in contract or evaluating sites on a daily basis. So the team is focused on scaling, and we've been pretty fortunate in having partners that want to build out more programmatic relationships across the states.
Let me understand, when you say that you have some capacity available, anyone out there that has an electric truck probably wants to ring up, call you up. But the idea is, are these top-offs or are these longer range fills or a combination of both?
That's a good question. So could be, right? It's a typical marketing answer. It depends. But honestly,
it's a consultant's answer, John.
Yeah, true. We're mostly working with fleets that we're partnering with, and we're building out the infrastructure on their behalf. So in these sites, we're really purchasing on a thesis-driven basis, but we're building out sites that we're modeling after like similar implementations for existing fleets. So some of them are on the passenger car, really suited for either ride-hailing or autonomous vehicle fleets. But on the heavy-duty side, we're mostly focused on drayage. And then maybe if you're thinking of the long-haul side, and we can get into this in more detail, but we're really focused on building out a network of hydrogen sites for Nikola. And in those sites, we look at it as kind of the corridor approach where you will have a string of sites all across the United States.
And I remember with the Nikola announcement, which came either during or right before the ACT Expo earlier this year, because I remember talking to Matt about that. And, it was a big deal, and it was a huge boost, really, for Nikola, because they had said, we're going to do 60 stations by 2026. And all of a sudden, they've got 50 of them, maybe 50, committed, and you have money. They don't have a lot of money. We just wrote this week that, the emphasis on Southern California to start is kind of necessary. They have to do it because, and they're going to need partners. So why don't you talk for just a minute? It's either 6 or 8. I wrote 8. I hope I'm right.
Yeah, 8.
That you're actually working on where you're going to add hydrogen to the electrification, to battery electric charging, and you'll run the Hyla stations there?
Exactly. So the way the joint development agreement works is we are using their Hyla brand. It's part of the Nikola Energy arm, and we're developing these sites that are really commercial, open sites. You have, of course, have to enter into an agreement with them, but it won't just be for Nikola. They will be part hydrogen sites where if you have a fleet that you're scaling up of hydrogen vehicles, you can work with them and be able to access refueling on site. And then a large majority of those sites, we will have battery electric vehicle infrastructure as well.
Right. Who, just from if you can take it apart a little further, who actually benefits most from having the hydrogen? Obviously, the hydrogen is critically important, just like the electricity is for a battery electric. But who really benefits? I mean, hydrogen is still pretty expensive on a kilogram basis, right?
Yeah, and they're working with tons of partnerships right now that are in place to bring that supply chain to bear, but also bring the cost down on a per kilogram basis. If you ask me directly who benefits, like I support this company, I love this company, I'm here for a reason, right? So in the long term, we think these are very valuable assets, and we're in a sense building out a new asset class. But if you think about it like operationally, we have fleets that are coming to us and they're saying the duty cycles that we're putting our vehicles through, battery electric just won't fit the bill right now.
Right.
Like it could down the road or even in the near future, but right now we need something if we want to go zero emission. And that's where kind of the partnership started, right? And us going and working with them.
Right. Well, I think it's one of the more tangible things that we've seen, and of course that you're right that Nikola has all the way back in Indiana and in Missouri and other places they've got offtake.
Yeah.
They say they've got enough hydrogen to get them into 2024 committed.
Yeah.
So will you actually have a Hyla station? Will you be the first Nikola station? They've got a few others.
There's some in the works. I can't say that for sure, but we'll be, of course, some of the first. And yeah, they're working through supply chain. I will say, we look at this in the big picture long term, and this is like the tip of the iceberg. You mentioned like 50. We're looking at up to 50 stations across the United States. We're heavily focused in California right now,
right.
But we do expect that to branch out across the United States.
Well, I mean, for its part, I mean, Nikola does have the first in production fuel cell truck, a Class 8 truck, and others certainly are making fuel cells. We've got Toyota, back in Kentucky,
exactly.
making stacks. Peterbilt will be online and Kenworth in a couple of years.
Yeah.
But for right now, it's Nikola is still got the lead. I mean, we write about them. It's an amazing soap opera. We know that, but but your part of it does seem to be something that you're sticking with them, right? I mean, it's on board. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of these facilities and what you have in the ground and things like that, because it feels like a very fast expansion. I guess I want to understand just how far along some of these really are. I mean, contracts are great and plans are great, but what are we actually getting done?
I'm so happy you asked me that, because we're kind of chomping at the bits to talk about a lot of the work that we're doing, but we have a kind of show and prove mentality, and we don't want to come off as if like we're fly by night. So we actually have a site that's live. Keys are handed over to a customer right now. It's in the Port of Long Beach. It's got 65 DC fast chargers. Depending on how you look at it, the largest heavy-duty truck depot in the United States for the drayage use case. We have not announced that partnership and that customer yet. Beginning of next year, we will be doing that. But it's a great time right now to be developing.
What kind of charging rate are we talking about? I mean, will you be, how many megawatts do you have there? And
So anywhere from, depending on the use case, what our customers are asking for right now is anywhere from 180 kW all the way up to 350 kW on the chargers. That site is over 6 megawatts of power.
Okay.
Right, and I know we were just talking about temporary power solutions, like working with the utility there and coming to bring that power to bear. It's challenging. It's very challenging, and we've come up with some pretty unique and creative solutions there, and the power's right around the corner.
Well, when I think about what some of the majors are doing, NFI has an operation going online very soon in Ontario. Obviously, Snyder has its thing in El Monte. We've got Watt EV at the port. Yourself, I guess, around or at the port. Feels like we're starting to get some critical mass. Yeah. Especially because we're not to the hockey stick yet for electric truck adoption.
Very far.
And we've had honestly some quality setbacks around recalls and things like that. So maybe there's a little more optimism here in terms of getting that infrastructure in place.
Definitely. I mentioned 20 plus sites either live or in development. Like that is the runway of like 2025, 2026. So when we have these strategic discussions around like how many sites do we need to purchase in the near term, we know that's a 2-year to 3-year out decision that we're making right now. we're fortunate in having partners that are kind of like, here's a peek behind the curtain, this is where we want to go, and we can build on their behalf. But we know if we don't also purchase on a thesis-driven basis and kind of learn from them and say we need to be in these strategic markets, we're missing out 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
But just to be clear, because we throw around a lot of terms in this business,
Yeah.
truck as a service, charging as a service, things like that. You're not attached, you're not doing trucks for people necessarily.
No. And I would say, I would define us as infrastructure as a service, right? And
There's a new one.
Yeah,
You got one more.
and maybe the delineation here is like we do not own vehicles for sure. That's not in our business model. And ultimately, we kind of sit underneath the operations of the fleet. So we serve fleets that are moving goods, moving people, or building out networks. And at the end of the day, the infrastructure on site, we tend to focus on the chargers, right? Or we focus on hydrogen. But it's everything from that to the bathrooms on site, to the access controls and security cameras. We run all of that so the fleet can focus on their operations.
What about charging stations? Do you have preferred partners for those and that sort of thing?
Definitely, we have some announcements we'll be making. I will say we've said we're charger agnostic in the past, and we're moving away from that. Like that is not our approach. While depending on the customer, we can help and kind of bridge the gap between if they have a preferred solution and we can make that work. We have a handful of partners we really do like working with.
I'm not advocating for them per se. That's not my job. But did you notice that ChargePoint made the top 10, the top 25 in Freight Tech today? That was a surprise to me. We just wrote about them a few weeks ago, and Rich Moore is one of those guys who just, he's forgotten more about this industry than I'll probably ever know. But it's really interesting because there are, at each of these critical places, infrastructure, chargers, trucks, we've got those that are going to emerge, right? And know a lot and.
Yeah, and I've worked with some great folks there over the years, and I would say a lot of these players that have come from like the network side, they've bridged the gap into like charging as a service, like more on-premises work on behalf of fleets, and they've started to build out really the only solutions that were available back then. Over the years, they've evolved, and we're starting to work with players like ChargePoint because they're much more flexible than they have been in the past. And one thing that's critical for us is we need to see everything that's going on with all of the equipment that's deployed on our site. And in the past, it was kind of like this walled garden. It's like, no, you use our platform. We're pulling all of that together so that, again, the fleet doesn't have to worry about it, and we give them full visibility into it.
Well, whether it's a startup like, and I love the term because I just got back in the pool myself, but FlipTurn just comes onto the thing, and they're willing to tell you pretty much everything all along the way. So is ChargePoint, and I'm sure others are too. It's almost become a TMS of a sort. And I think that, that visibility, becomes obviously critical to you.
Yeah.
You got to know if your chargers are up and where they are. And
we have some customers that are like, we just want API access to everything, and we're willing and able to do that. We want them to be able to see it. We're incentivized to have maximum uptime on site, and when you think about it that way, it's a very different paradigm. Whereas in the past, if you think about public charging, I actually just took a road trip. I drive an electric vehicle, and while I was able to charge, I was showing up at sites, and some chargers were down, some weren't, right? So we go through a myriad of things to make sure we have maximum uptime.
well, that idea of charger reliability is something that has probably hurt the passenger car side of things.
Yeah.
People look at it, they throw up their hands, and they're not sure what to do because, as I said, of the trucks, the cars are just smaller paperweights if you can't charge them. Why don't you just, bring us home here? We've got about a minute left, and I'm going to take the last minute from me. But give me your. What do you want these guys to know today? That you haven't shared.
Well, I would say maybe two things. One, I think we're at a stage where if these larger fleets, especially the private or the for-hire operators, if they haven't done it already, they're starting to get into the pilot phase. If you're coming out of the pilot phase, we actually are in that sweet spot where it's perfect for us. Like you've learned a little bit, you've learned enough to be dangerous, and we can kind of hit the ground running. If you haven't, there are a ton of different solutions that may be viable, and I just encourage everyone to do as much research as possible. We're actually working through multiple playbooks where we're just literally publishing best practices within the industry. And we've done one that was focused on real estate site acquisition and identification, one that was focused on power procurement, and then this next one is focused on basically all of the different types of solutions. We talked about charging as a service today. We talked about infrastructure as a service. So I encourage folks to just read up and get as much education as possible in that regard. And then Maybe the second piece is when you're thinking about the deployments, I think a lot of the times power procurement is what rises to the top. And like I said, we focused on that up front. Yeah. We're finding permitting to be just as challenging.
Well, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
So when we get together next time, let's talk about permitting.
Yeah, let's do it.
Jonathan, good to see you.
All right.
All right, thanks very much. All right, folks, we are loving going out on the road and bringing shows to you. It's fun to be here in Chattanooga today. Next week, if everything goes well, we'll have our show from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we'll be visiting with Torque Robotics, and we hope to have some good interviews for you from there. We want your feedback. We want to hear what you think of the shows and things like that. We're trying to get better at this every week to the extent that we can. But you can find all of our episodes on the FreightWaves YouTube channel. There's a playlist there, so take a look at that, and thanks so much for joining us.